farms in the U.S. right now. In fact, USDA says the number of wheat farms in the country has declined by more than 40% in the last 20 years.
In this number, consumers had the worst view of where inflation will be in the next year since 1981. And that was not a sunshine and roses period in the American economy. We had high interest rates and high inflation. So people feeling a little grim, and they're blaming.
A profound transformation is quietly unfolding within the global agricultural landscape, one that threatens to dismantle the long-standing dominance of American wheat. For over a century, the United States has stood as a cornerstone in the global wheat market, its reputation built on consistent quality, reliability, and competitive pricing. Yet today, that reputation is eroding, not primarily because of price, but due to a growing loss of trust. Across farming communities in the American heartland, the ripple effects of this shift are becoming increasingly palpable as demand for their crops diminishes in ways that reflect deeper concerns about quality safety and supply chain dependability. Over the past 2 decades, the number of wheat farms in the U.S. has dropped by more than 40%. While consolidation and evolving farming practices explain part of this decline, the larger story is far more complex. It intertwines economic pressures, shifting global priorities, and trade policy missteps. The current consumer outlook mirrors the challenging economic environment of the 1980s, marked by high inflation and punishing interest rates, creating a strain on farmers reminiscent of those turbulent times. Yet the problem now extends beyond simple economic cycles. Trade policies once aimed at protecting American agriculture have paradoxically become barriers that undercut its competitiveness. Tariffs designed to shield domestic producers now function more like wrecking balls, damaging America's agricultural standing and alienating crucial customers. The prevailing narratives that justify these policies increasingly feel detached from the realities on the ground as farmers witness tangible consequences that threaten their livelihoods and the viability of entire communities. The human toll of this crisis is real and immediate. Many family farms handed down through generations face an uncertain future when their customer base evaporates. This is not hypothetical. It is the reality unfolding across wheat-producing states. Just 3 months ago, the Philippines, a reliable and significant buyer, abruptly canceled $240 million worth of U.S. wheat contracts. This single action did not happen in isolation, but initiated a cascade effect reverberating from Manila to Marseille, culminating in a 38% plunge in U.S. wheat export revenues within a single growing season. Remarkably, this steep decline occurred even as American wheat remained up to $10 per ton cheaper than competitor grains, indicating that price was no longer the primary concern. This crisis is fundamentally a crisis of confidence. The trust painstakingly built over a century based on consistent quality and reliability has been severely undermined. Into this breach has stepped Canada, assertively capturing market share and offering buyers an alternative perceived as safer, cleaner, and more dependable. The shift is also evident in changing logistics. Grain shipments, once routinely docking in Seattle, are now increasingly redirected to Vancouver, shifting vital economic activity to Canada. Farmers in states such as North Dakota, who have devoted their lives to cultivating wheat, are watching the lifeblood of their business. The steady income from exports flow into Canadian provinces like Saskatchewan. This transition is more than just a geographical rerouting. It symbolizes a fundamental realignment in global agricultural trust and market power. The speed of this shift is startling. Within just 72 hours in late May, the Philippines canceled 65,000 tons of prepaid U.S. wheat and replaced it with 110,000 tons sourced from Australia. This rapid reversal wiped out nearly $17 million in expected U.S. export revenues and contributed substantially to the total $240 million in lost contracts for the 2024 FAR 25 fiscal year. This was more than a financial loss. It was a clear and unmistakable signal from Asia that America's wheat supply was no longer guaranteed or preferred. The fallout continued with unprecedented intensity. USDA reports revealed wheat cancellations surpassing new sales by 128,800 tons in the final week of May, a net negative figure unseen in decades. For farmers reliant on export revenues to service loans, purchase seeds, and finance fertilizers, such disruptions threaten the very survival of their operations. The anxiety in farming communities, particularly in Kansas and North Dakota, is palpable as uncertainty clouds their immediate futures. Trade policy complications have compounded the crisis. Since April, a policy imposing fees of up to $1.5 million per voyage on China-linked vessels has prompted ocean carriers to avoid U.S. ports. This avoidance forces Asian importers to charter non-Chinese vessels, driving freight rates sharply higher. A Singapore-based shipper captured the grim reality. Right now, nobody dares book U.S. wheat. Too risky on costs. This sentiment is reflected in the Baltic Freight Index, which surged 9% to nearly $6,000 per 40-foot container unit on Asia-U.S. West Coast routes by June, with projections reaching $8,000. Such increases erase any price advantages, making American wheat 12% more expensive than Russian or Canadian alternatives once landed in Manila. South Korea presents a particularly stark example. Customs data reveal a precipitous collapse in U.S. horse-feed wheat imports from 121,000 tons in 2021-2022 to a mere 2,000 tons in 2023 to 2024, effectively reducing U.S. market share from 5% to nearly zero. In stark contrast, Canadian exporters have expanded their presence by over 200,000 tons in the high-protein segment, capturing 60% of premium bread flour orders. This shift is underpinned by growing concerns about glyphosate residues. Independent tests by the Environmental Working Group found glyphosate levels in U.S. wheat products reaching 1 to 150 parts per billion, far exceeding the group's safety guideline of 160 parts per billion. Canadian grain samples, on the other hand, exceeded residue limits in only 1.3% of tests conducted by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. For Korean buyers, Canadian wheat has thus become synonymous with cleanliness and safety, leading millers to pay premiums of up to $15 per ton to avoid U.S. wheat, now perceived as a health risk. Collectively, the Philippines and South Korea, historically consuming over 4 million tons of U.S. wheat annually, are now turning away in tandem. For the United States, the consequences are severe: a 38% revenue drop in a single quarter, while Canada, Australia, and Russia secure long-term contracts that further erode U.S. market share. South Korea's flour mill industry now ranks the United States behind Australia and Canada as suppliers of choice, a significant demotion that signals a deep loss of confidence. Looking ahead, the outlook darkens. New port fees due to be implemented in October and the European Union's forthcoming carbon tariffs targeting glyphosate-contaminated grain will further increase the cost and complexity of exporting U.S. wheat to Asia. Failure to adapt swiftly could allow this shift initiated in Manila and Seoul to become the opening salvo in a protracted decline of American wheat's global stature. Europe, once a bastion of support for U.S. wheat, has undergone a dramatic transformation in early 2025. New trade data reveal a surge in Canadian grain imports to the European Union, which jumped 65% in January alone, translating to an additional $179 million, primarily directed toward hard wheat and milling wheat used in bread and pasta production across France and Italy. Meanwhile, despite American wheat often being offered at lower prices, U.S. orders have contracted so severely that they no longer merit separate line items in trade reports. At Rouen Port, a French customs official noted almost poetically the steady arrival of red maple leaf marked ships, signaling Canada's growing dominance. The milling company Grand Moulin Dairy openly acknowledged switching to long-term contracts with Saskatchewan farmers, citing Canadian wheat's 18% lower carbon footprint and reduced risk of late delivery as decisive factors. These shifts are more than just financial decisions. They reflect a growing prioritization of sustainability and reliability among European buyers. The European Union's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, slated to begin levying charges in the third quarter of 2026, looms large. This mechanism will impose tariffs on imports with high carbon footprints, and millers are proactively adjusting their supply chains to avoid anticipated surcharges of up to $22 per ton. By locking in Canadian wheat contracts, now European buyers are hedging against future cost shocks, demonstrating a commitment to environmental responsibility where American wheat is perceived to fall short. Italy's resistance to American wheat is particularly pronounced. Amid pasta prices that have doubled the rate of inflation, Rome convened an emergency food security meeting, granting pasta manufacturers unprecedented freedom to abandon U.S. durum wheat entirely. Instead, they are pivoting decisively toward Canadian and, for the first time, Turkish suppliers. The Italian pasta giant Barilla has gone a step further by establishing a private laboratory in Saskatchewan to test for Michelin-grade protein levels prior to shipment. This investment in direct oversight underscores the level of distrust in American wheat supply chains and the premium placed on quality assurance. The market data paint a vivid picture of this divergence. By late May, Canadian wheat exports hit 17.4 million tons after 41 weeks, a 2% increase year-on-year impressive, given the harsh weather conditions on the prairies. FOB prices at Vancouver surged to $298 per ton, outstripping the $244 per ton offered for U.S. hard red winter wheat at the Gulf of Mexico. Despite the price premium, European customers view this difference as a safety premium, paying more to ensure supply reliability and lower environmental impact. This raises a crucial question: is the recent turn from U.S. wheat in France and Italy a temporary aberration or the definitive end of America's century-long reign in this sector? The answer will likely become clearer as CBAM is implemented and the EU tightens its glyphosate limits later this year. Meanwhile, Mexico has delivered another unexpected setback to American farmers. Since the beginning of 2025, U.S. wheat shipments have encountered significant delays at the Laredo border crossing. Thousands of tons remain stalled under tarps as customs officers grapple with a tariff schedule that seems to shift almost monthly. According to a border broker source who spoke to Reuters, over 600 grain wagons were stuck in March alone, with clearance times stretching from the typical 36 hours to over 120 hours. This delay adds nearly $12 per ton in storage fees, further undermining American competitiveness. While the U.S. government attempts to enforce retaliatory tariffs of 25% against Mexico and Canada, Mexico's domestic anti-inflation policy ironically grants zero tariffs on grain imports from countries other than the United States. This creates a paradox where Mexican millers, from giants like Grupo Bimbo to Harinera Anahuac, willingly pay more, up to $15 per ton, for Canadian wheat rather than risk the uncertainties of U.S. border processing. The introduction of a flexible tariff table by the White House in March has complicated matters, requiring every shipment to be refiled with a new HS code and import fee ruling. One law firm described this as adding one more layer of paperwork to the paperwork tower, creating a bureaucratic bottleneck that delays shipments and frustrates buyers. Canada's logistical prowess sharply contrasts with this disarray. The combined Canadian Pacific Kansas City CPKC and Canadian National CN Rail Network have pledged to complete the Vancouver to Veracruz grain loop in under 12 days, 3 days faster than the American Minneapolis to Eagle Pass route. This operational efficiency is a critical advantage in an industry where timing impacts profitability and production schedules. Canada's advantage extends beyond logistics to the realm of transparency and sustainability. In response to growing buyer demand for traceability, every prairie wheat lot now carries a blockchain-based QR code, tracing its journey from farm to cold storage and port shipment. Unveiled in April by the Protein Industries Supercluster and the Standards Council of Canada, this initiative allows importers to scan and instantly access detailed data on moisture content, protein levels, and fumigation frequency. This level of transparency, far from a mere technological novelty, is a cornerstone of trust building in today's global supply chains. Sustainability credentials further boost Canadian wheat's appeal. A recent Canadian report on crop carbon footprints places prairie wheat's emissions between 343 and 600 kilograms of CO2 per ton. When accounting for soil carbon uptake, these figures improve to between 279 and 300 kilograms, approximately 18% lower than the U.S. baseline of 343 kilograms. For Mexican flour mills facing increasingly aggressive carbon tax regimes, Canada's low-carbon wheat designation acts as a VIP pass, granting access to markets less tolerant of environmental externalities. Crucially, Canada has maintained competitive pricing by choosing its battles wisely. While the U.S. slapped 25% tariffs on Mexican and Canadian imports, American farmers lost the ability to cut prices to regain lost customers. Meanwhile, a weaker Canadian dollar, hovering around $0.68 USD in April, keeps FOB Vancouver prices just $7 per ton above Gulf values, despite a longer sea journey. Combining efficient customs, blockchain-driven transparency, and a compelling carbon advantage, Canada has effectively laid out a feast for Mexico. Data corroborate this narrative. Mexican imports of Canadian wheat reached $178.5 million in 2024 and have nearly doubled in the first quarter of 2025 to $90 million. Conversely, U.S. wheat sales in Mexico slid 28% in Q1 2025. The message is unmistakable in a world grappling with geopolitical uncertainty and rising consumer consciousness. Price alone no longer guarantees success. Reliability, traceability, and sustainability are the currencies of modern agricultural trade, and Mexico's recent purchasing patterns confirm this definitively. In this context, the plight of American wheat farmers is not a matter of falling prices, but of a rapidly depreciating brand. Reuters reports shrinking U.S. wheat acreage while Canada expands planting intentions for 2024. Within just 18 months, redirected orders have shattered America's century-old monopoly. The U.S. brand now carries the weight of late deliveries, tariff entanglements, and a glyphosate stigma, the toxic seasoning relentlessly spotlighted by agricultural media. This credibility kraken spreads quickly. Today it afflicts wheat, but tomorrow it threatens soybeans, corn, and beef. The stakes could not be higher. Reuters warns that up to $191 billion in U.S. farm exports face similar retaliatory risks. Soy and corn are squarely in the crosshairs if the White House maintains its rigid tariff strategies against Canada and Mexico. Rebuilding trust will be far more challenging and costly than simply lowering prices. To the north, Ottawa invests heavily in blockchain traceability and reducing carbon footprints, directly addressing buyers' evolving demands for transparency and sustainability. If Washington remains fixated on tariffs and coercive trade tactics, it risks losing the global grain leadership to Canada, Australia, and Russia, while American wheat-producing states like Kansas and North Dakota fade into obscurity. This moment is a wake-up call. The world has moved beyond a simplistic view of price and volume. Today's agricultural buyers seek consistency, accountability, and environmental responsibility. Failure to acknowledge and act on this paradigm shift threatens not just the wheat industry, but the entire fabric of American agricultural exports. Without a decisive course correction, the Made in USA label risks becoming an expensive relic replaced on tables worldwide by competitors who understand and meet the demands of a new era.